Coming up on Theater Talk.
You're these wistful, pathetic people bemoaning your lives,
Yes.
which...
And also in the play. So it's good casting.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
I had bad dreams last night.
Oh?
I dreamt I was 52 and I wasn't married.
Were you dreaming in the documentary form?
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
So, Michael, there's a wonderful new comedy on Broadway.
By one of my favorite writers of all time, Durang is one of Broadway's great comic writers. We haven't seen much of Chris in a while, so I'm delighted that he is back on Broadway with a very fine new play called Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike. Now, the title may tell you that it's kind of Chris's comic take on the world of Chekhov. And two of the actors from the play are with us today. They are the very, very talented Kristine Nielsen. Welcome to Theater Talk.
Thank you.
And our old friend David Hyde Pierce, who's back. You haven't been down here since Curtains, right, David?
I think that's right. Yeah, we were trying to remember the last time. I think it was Curtains.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you both. And I do like the Chekhovian beard.
Thank you.
Oh, it's
Thank
wonderful.
you.
So Chekhov, they often say, his plays are comedies. Mm-hmm. Many people consider Chekhov's plays comedies. Is Chris's play, should it be considered a drama and not a comedy? How do you play it? How do you play a comedy talking about a comedy? To get too meta here, is that possible?
Well, I think we're lucky that he's written a play with about a family, you know, characters. So you start with there, of course, and you just wing off from that, whatever hideous circumstances transpire as we do the play.
So you don't really play it for laughs, though, right? Even though it is funny.
Well, you know, it's the old thing that you know, it's especially with Chris's work and especially with this particular play, it's a real sort of tightrope walk of the style in which you play it. Some very absurd things happen in the play, and but those sort of take care of themselves. And I think, especially the more we've played it, the more we've settled into, you know, I would call a sort of normal way of people relating on stage, and then the audience gets to see how crazy it is.
Right.
You're these wistful, pathetic people bemoaning your lives,
Yes.
which...
And also in the play. So it's good casting.
That's right.
Apparently,
we should
but
say-
apparently in Chekhov's time, this was, you know, this was strange and avant-garde to have this kind of people on the stage. But now it's so all of us.
Yeah. Well, and Michael, you'd said Chekhov's plays are comedies, and he called them comedies. But most productions of Chekhov that you see are not very funny. Because again, like Chris's work, it's hard to find the balance with his stuff, and when it's done well, there's nothing like it.
But if they only had dwarf costumes like you do.
Right. Well, you know,
That would always work. Now, in this
Chekhov's laws.
The Chris's take on this is in many of the Chekhov plays, we have the rich landowner, and there are all these kind of hangers-on, and you sort of are the hangers-on, and here we have a Hollywood star who's got this estate, and you kind of just live on that estate, but things might be sold out from underneath you, and your life might be upended.
Yes, that's
Right. Well, we're actually siblings. You know, the Sigourney Weaver plays the Hollywood star, but she's our big sister, and she's always been sort of the star of the family. And we're the brother and sister who kind of stayed home, took care of our parents when they got ill, and then there are some, you know, we've got our sister Masha, played by Sigourney. She brings her very young boy toy with her, and we've also got our housekeeper, played by Shalita Grant, who's crazy and psychic, and our neighbor Nina, played by Genevieve Angelson, who's kind of a young, starry-eyed, aspiring actress.
She's the perfect Chekhov, young, starry-eyed.
Exactly.
right. Just waiting with binoculars to see the star arrive. You know,
That's right.
just in the shadows,
Yeah.
lurking somewhere, but very normal.
Yeah.
Now, have you, Kristine, have you ever done any real Chekhov in your career?
You know, I have, but not for 100 years. You know, it's like what we all do when we started. You do it and study it in school.
Yeah.
So, you know, you think you've done it. Again, I was very lucky. Walt Jones directed it up at Yale, and he did it as a comedy. So we did Uncle Vanya.
Which one did you do?
We did Uncle Vanya, and I actually did Sonia.
You-
So, you know, I was prepared for the pies in the face that Sonia gets, you know, already, you know.
That's right.
And so I feel blessed that way, but I don't think I don't know. I feel Chris sort of just vamped off of the Chekhov. I think he loves Chekhov. So as a theater person, he's always loved it and always found it funny. But in this instance, I think he just took it as a, and now let me talk about family and looking back and middle age and
Yeah, well, I think that
my take on it.
that melancholic strain of middle age and of trying to figure out what have I been doing my whole life. Has it been a waste? Which is a real theme in Chekhov's plays that I think Chris is playing with in this play. Have you done some Chekhov before, Dave?
I have. I did one of my first jobs. I was in the Seagull at the Guthrie,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then a few years later, I worked with Peter Brook when he did his production of The Cherry Orchard here in town.
I'd love to get a little bit of a background on how you got into this business. Kristine, can you tell me the very first time you ever went on stage and when the bug bit?
oh my gosh. Let me see. I think it was a church play, as they always seem to be.
Where were you growing up?
I grew up in D.C.
Okay, all right.
So it was, I remember my mother made me angel costume. I had wonderful wings, tinfoil, you know. And the shepherd behind me put his hook right through the wings. I remember flying, going, wings. And then, and that was it. I wanted to play Mary Magdalene, who doesn't?
Oh, who doesn't?
But no, I was an angel that had to just announce something.
Right, but once that hook.
But I
went through-
loved it. I was like, I want more wings.
And David, for you, the very first time you were on a stage and you thought, wow, this is, I don't want to be anywhere else.
You know, when I was in elementary school and I was in 4th grade, I found this volume of Shakespeare's plays in the school library that were slightly abridged, made easier for little kids to
Of
read.
course you did.
Not a lot, but, and I found Julius Caesar's death scene, and I flipped. I thought, this is the coolest thing, and I made my friends enact the death scene with me for our class, and I got to be Caesar and die, because that was always my big thing. I love to die. So that was my early, you know, attraction to theatricality.
You were a very highbrow child.
I know.
I know,
Well,
I'm
I don't
so-
know.
She's got tinfoil
I've
wings.
got tinfoil wings
It was
at a
more.
church pageant.
It wasn't so much the Shakespeare; it was the dying that was the thing that got me, so.
Well, my mother used to say I would be in the bathroom with like a towel around my head playing some nun, you know, I don't know, because I could do that and be sobbing. And she'd be like, what is wrong with my child? You know, and here, cut now.
You discovered the abridged version
sobbing
of
nun.
Agnes of God.
Yes,
That's
or-
what you wanted to do it. So, and then, did either one of you have the real struggle though when you're trying to make it in this business, or did it happen very quickly for you?
Look at me.
I'm
I'm
my wings are
still
still ripped.
struggling.
Right.
He doesn't have her taxes done yet.
I don't know.
Grant, don't listen.
By the time this airs, they will be done.
Did you really have to go through the ropes or do the waitressing, all that kind of stuff?
Of course I did, and I actually have been very lucky because my parents were very supportive of me while I was going through it. But I also laugh and go, I think it's helped me enormously now. I feel I've been so lucky. I got to do things for $2 a week that I'm so proud that I did and so happy with crazy people. Chris Durang being one of them.
Yeah,
That, you
yeah.
know, and
What was the first thing you did
is
with Chris? Do you remember?
The first thing I did, well, I was in a play with him that was a disaster, Ubu at Lincoln Center.
Oh, yes.
That's where we bonded.
Right.
Was backstage in
Wow.
the green
Was
room.
Oliver Platt in that?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
famous.
He tries to deny it.
Yep.
We have pictures.
You have the plate.
Yes, but Chris and I, because it was such misery and agony, and we whined all the time, and we found two whiners. The two whiners found each other, and in the green room, and then we started talking about life, and I don't say I was an inspiration for Betty's Summer Vacation,
Well-
but we talked a lot about disastrous TV shows and all those things that were out there, you know, the Jerry Springer, they were all just popping up,
Right,
you know,
right.
but people were like, and then I slept with this doorknob, you know, and it was like crazy things that people were willing to go on TV and say.
I was in a play with Oliver Platt.
Yeah,
You won it.
I've admitted it now, and he'll find me.
He wrote Betty's Summer Vacation for you.
Yeah, which
You
is a
were
wonderful
brilliant.
play.
You won
Wonderful
an
play.
OB. You were celebrated all over, and it's still one of the funniest performances I've ever seen.
It was one of the great plays, you know, when Chris does his poisonous, scabrous,
Yes.
I call it scary, Savonarola moments about our society, you know, which I love, which is that big mirror about where we are as a culture and where we are as a people and the choices we've made
Yep.
as Americans. There's nobody can touch him, in my opinion, but in Betty's, that's what he was doing. And, you know, at the same time, he had that very moving speech at the end about where is the quiet?
Yeah.
Where is
I remember that.
where do we stop all this noise and this ruckus. And so I've always found he has this little soul that he once in a while shares with you. And I think in this show, I'm so happy he's sharing so much more of it.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. And David, just quickly for you, did you went to Yale, right?
I did.
And so did you just rocket right out of there to superstardom?
No, no, it's more like being trundled in a wheelbarrow. I came to New York, and I very quickly got my first job, which was a Chris Durang play, Beyond Therapy, on Broadway.
Of course.
And so that was like instant success, and then the New York Times came out and killed it, and we closed in 2 weeks. So I had in sort of one experience the best, I was working with John Lithgow and Diane Wiest and all these people, and Chris, and then it went away, and that was my introduction. So I thought,
And you did Wendy's play then.
A few years later, I did the Hyde Chronicles, Wendy
Yes.
Wasserstein's play.
And then off to California for a little while.
Yeah, I was here about 12
Yes.
years doing
Right.
off-Broadway, did a lot of stuff at Playwrights Horizons, and a lot of new plays at the Public, Shakespeare in the Park, and then went out to do TV.
Okay, we got to wrap it up. The play is called Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike at the Golden Theater, starring the very talented Kristine Nielsen and David Hyde Pierce. Thanks a lot for
And
being our
Sigourney
guests.
Weaver's lurking around there.
She's in there
she's
somewhere.
looking around.
She's under the table.
Oh my God. No, I felt a cold air.
That's right. Thanks a lot, guys, for being our guest today. It's a real
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, you're not alone in the room.
I'm sorry, it's all rather new for me.
Really? You've had 5 husbands.
Hey, I like older women.
I'm glad to hear it.
I mean, either spark is there, or, right, Masha?
Isn't he adorable?
He's attractive. I'm not sure if he's adorable.
Michael, today we're going to talk about the important and powerful new play, Finks.
Yes.
It is about the Blacklist of the 1950s. It was written by Joe Gilford,
Who
an
has
old
some
friend of
experience in
mine.
that area because your father, the great actor Jack Gilford, was in fact a victim of the blacklist.
That-
as I believe your mother was too.
That's right.
That's
the
right.
play is a fictionalized account of their struggles with the blacklist.
And I hastily want to also introduce William Carden, the artistic director of the Ensemble Studio Theater, who developed this play.
I think, yes, we developed them and we also produced it.
So, Joe, take us back. How old were you when your parents were
Well,
blacklisted?
I was very small, so
you have
the
very little
experience,
memories.
but they're memories that I have and many of us do. I still keep in touch with a circle of children who were also blacklisted, whose parents were also blacklisted. And the experience was similar. It was a lot of frustration because if your parents were actors, they were effectively banned from television and at that time radio,
right,
which
which
was
is very
still a place you could make a good living as an actor. And so luckily for many of us, we were able to work on Broadway. But the feeling was there was a certain frustration around the house, there was a certain paranoia, and there were certain things that we were cautioned about talking about. I remember my mother was hurriedly getting us 3 kids dressed for school one morning, and I think I blurted out, "Well, what is communism?" And she says, "Nobody knows." That was her final answer.
Now, can I ask you, had your parents in fact been members of the Communist Party?
Well,
Had
that's
they,
an
had they
interesting
joined
question. You actually didn't need to be a member of the Communist Party to be blacklisted.
Right, of course.
But if you were looking to be blacklisted, it didn't hurt.
Right.
Many people were not actual members of the party. My mother happened to be a member of the Student Socialists, and she may have been a member of the Communist Party. My father was never a member of the party. But at that time, all you had to do was attend a rally or a meeting or any kind of sign any kind of petition for any kind of progressive cause, and you were effectively then visible to the people who were doing what so-called blacklisting, and that's something we made.
Well,
You show in the play that your parents, when they got together, your father was a nightclub comedian, and he was so attracted by your mother that she was able to lure him into her interest group of politics.
That's true.
Yeah.
Was your father political in any way? I mean,
He
I
was,
get the
in
sense because I
fact.
knew your mother toward the end of her life, and she was quite political. Was your father interested in politics? or was he
They
an
were
entertainer?
equally political. He never hesitated to do a benefit for all sorts of civil rights causes, anti-war, and in fact, at the same time my generation was going through its 60s anti-war and alternate countercultural sort of thing, and I found I wasn't rebelling against my parents at all. I would meet them at demonstrations in Central Park or in Washington. So I was like, Mom, Dad, I'm with my friends here.
You should have been for Goldwater. That would have been the rebellion.
That's how I would have rebelled and become an accountant.
Now, William, what got you thinking about developing a play like this? Why was this topic?
Well, when I took over this theater 5 years ago, Joe gave me this play. The play had actually been done at New York Stage and Film in a production in the summer. But I read it and I was just totally struck with it. And I thought, he has done an extraordinary job of making, everyone knows about the blacklist. Everyone knows what it is. But he tells the story in a way that you experience it in a very personal way. And I think you really understand what it means to name names, which is actually done in the play.
Or what it means to not name names.
And what it means to not name names.
Yeah.
Well, but what the impact of that actual act, as you sat in a chair and said other people's names and you knew their careers were in many ways finished.
Well, I mean, it really struck home, of course, for your parents because the man who named names was Jerome Robbins.
That's
famously.
correct.
Right.
And were your parents friends with Jerry Robbins?
Well, that may be the sequel to Finks.
Yeah.
Jerry Robbins, my father was in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum on Broadway with Zero.
Right.
They were both blacklisted, they were both Cafe Society comics, and they were both good friends. And they both landed this great job. And the Blacklist at that time was sort of breaking down of its own sort of weight.
Because this was what, 64?
Actually 62,
But he had named them way before that, right?
Yes, he had. And everyone had been blacklisted already.
Right.
And Jerry went on to do West Side Story. And the show was, quote unquote, in trouble when it was in Washington. They couldn't get audiences to really like it. And Stephen Sondheim said we should really bring in Jerry Robbins. Mr. Abbott, George Abbott, was the director.
Right.
And even he said, yes, let's bring in Robbins. At that time, he was the show fixer at that time. So when he came in to start rehearsals with the company, Jack and Zero walked out. They quit. Now, Robbins named my mother. We don't know actually who named my father, but it's a fact that he named my mother. So they walked out, went home to their wives, and both wives said, don't take off your coats. You're going back there. Those are called jobs. And as Kate Mostel famously said to Zero, we of the left do not blacklist. And they went back to work with Jerry begrudgingly, and then Zero went on to work with Jerry for years. Or for a long time, and the fact was that he refused to address Jerry directly and addressed him only through a stage manager during all the rehearsals and out-of-town tryouts. So the resonating sort of legacy of that found its way even after the Blacklist was long gone and people were successful. The resentments and the grudges were still there.
Robbins famously was said to be protecting his own homosexuality, protecting his reputation, and he didn't want to be named as a homosexual.
Well, Arthur Lawrence famously said, and I quoted in the play, a couple of things Lawrence said which were very effective statements were that, wouldn't it be nice if that were true?
Well, I mean, the story that I had always heard from Eric Bentley, who, the great critic who knew your mother and your father and knew Zero, Eric was quite friendly with Jerry Robbins because Jerry directed Mother Courage, that Anne Bancroft was in, and Eric did the translation. And Eric said that Jerry had told him, Jerry's line was that in fact the FBI had sent someone around to follow Jerry when he was out of town with a show because they thought he was meeting communist cells, but what they found was that he was in bed with young men, and they used that to pressure him to name names. That's what he said. I mean, do we have any way of knowing that's true? I mean, you've researched this, you've looked into this.
No, I don't think we do, but I think, because we were going to do this play, I thought, what we don't want this play to be is like a diatribe against the people who name names. What we want this play to resonate with is that no human being should be put in that position.
Correct.
And I think that's what, I think that's what it captures. And those hearings were totally show trials. They already had the names. They didn't need to put anybody on the stand. They didn't need to interrogate them. They did that for show. Yes. And that's what makes it a very interesting play to do today.
You give your parents different names, you give Robbins different names, but we all know that these are your parents. But when they are called up to testify, both of your parents handle it differently, but both very valiantly. Are those stories true of what they did?
It's interesting. If I had told the true story, it wouldn't have made a very good play.
All right.
And so I had to fictionalize it to a point where I needed to create drama that was based on actual occurrences. And that's why I've fictionalized so many of the characters.
Yes.
It's because I needed to make a lot of composite choices.
Yes.
So that I could express everything that happened in a finite amount of time without writing a 4,000-page book about it. My mother's testimony is very much like what it is in the play, but I've merged it with some other. My father's testimony was nothing like that, but I've merged it with others to make it more dramatic and in a way express the story that I wanted to tell.
Can you tell us what your father's testimony in real life was like?
Yes, my father came into the room yelling and screaming at the committee, and for 4.5 minutes did that, and then was dismissed and left yelling and screaming.
It would be dramatic.
It would have been incoherent, or it would have been a Bill Irwin piece.
Now, in the course, I'm working on a book now, and in the course of the research, Betty Jacobs, who is the widow of Bernie Jacobs, who ran the Schubert organization, gave me a tape that he made for the family at the end of his life, and he talks about doing Jerome Robbins' Broadway.
Who made the tape?
Bernie Jacobs made it before he died. It was just for his family, but they're allowing me to use it for the book. And he talks about Jerry Robbins, and he said that Jerry Robbins was an impossible man to work with because he could not get away from what he had done. And when they had to go before Actors Equity, because there was an issue back then about they didn't have enough minorities in the cast, he had to go to Jerry to convince Jerry to go talk before the Equity Council. And Jerry would only go if he had been given Equity's word. They would not ask him about naming names. I mean, this is what, 40 years later. That's why he did so few interviews.
Interesting to hear that. I didn't know that.
He wouldn't. He did. If you look, he did very little press. He gave very few interviews. There was no big Vanity Fair profile of him. He did not talk to anyone because he did not want to be asked why he named names.
I have to say, Michael, I would have to say, hopefully he did experience some pain and guilt. He claims that he did. But when you tell that story, which I didn't know, it's a very interesting story to know, is that that's simply the story of a man who won't stand up for anything.
Yeah.
He hid his homosexuality.
Yep.
He hid this guilt, and he just hid. Elia Kazan was very much in character, and I like to say that if there had been no Blacklist, they would have done something else rotten. Because if you know anyone who worked with either man, they were the most
monsters.
Gifted monsters.
Genius. Yeah,
genius. And by the way, their acts against my parents have no effect on my appreciation for their contribution to our art. Elia Kazan still probably one of the most brilliant, if not the best director
and Robbins,
of the 20th
I would say,
century.
Robbins and Balanchine, the greatest choreographers.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a bitter lesson we learn in this business that the great geniuses are not often nice guys.
It's true. I don't think you need to know the personal sort of values or lives of great people. I think it's probably best not to.
But Bill, you bring up a good point that in the play, we find ourselves, at least I did, asking myself, would I be strong enough not to name names? I hope to God.
Out in a minute.
I hope to God I would be. But that's what you're evaluating. Could I?
Well,
could I be brave?
you also see what you see what the pressures they were under, and I do. I'm not defending their behavior, but they were also they were geniuses.
Right.
And it may have been unbearable not to practice what they had such an incredible talent to practice. I mean, I'm always haunted by Lee J. Cobb's testimony when he comes out and the committee says, thank you for coming back, Mr. Cobb. And he says, well, I haven't worked in 3 years. And I'm an actor. I started as an actor. To say as an actor, you haven't worked in 3 years is just, it's heartbreaking.
Your parents, they got through it, they worked. But we can't lose sight of the fact that in the case of one person, Philip Loeb, who was Zero Mostel's great friend from City University, Robbins, I believe, named Philip Loeb, and Philip Loeb killed himself. You deal with this in your play.
All true.
Your parents knew Philip Loeb too?
Yes, Philip was a friend to everybody, and Phil was a star of the
Goldbergs.
The Goldbergs, and she campaigned to keep him on the show. She was not passive at all. She was a real hero, but the network and the sponsor simply wouldn't let it happen.
Gertrude Berg.
Gertrude Berg, and he had a lot of pressures in his life after that, and unfortunately he's one of the casualties. He's not the only one. My namesake, Joseph Edward Bromberg, also died from the pressure of it. We know very well that John Garfield, the father of a friend of mine, Julie Garfield, he also died from the pressure of it, as did actors like Canada Lee and Anne Revere and a number of other people because of the pressures of the blacklist. It's really hard. You know, imagine if you're, you know, being audited by the IRS, there's a federal indictment against you, and you can't work. Yeah. That's pretty much the feeling you have. And actually, people were audited gratuitously and harassed by the federal government because of this. So there are these little things.
Right. Now, we got to wrap it up, but we know Zero did not speak directly to Jerry Robbins. Did either of your parents ever talk to him after?
Yes.
They did.
At the opening of Forum, first time my mother saw Jerome Robbins in person since he named her in 1955. And I've skewed the time of the play. I should tell that if audiences want to know. And she raised her glass, and she said in the loudest voice across the room in Sardi's, the ground floor of Sardi's, where the opening was, she crowed across the room, "Jerry Robbins, 1955, you can kiss my ass." That was her toast on opening night.
And I don't think he ever recovered.
Well, she never did.
Yeah.
Why should anybody really? There is a line, everyone should carry a scar.
All right, tell them where it is, Susan.
It's at the Ensemble Studio Theater.
549 West 52nd Street.
Thank you very much.
In Manhattan.
Thank you.
All right, Joe Gilford, William Carden, thanks for being our guest today.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.